In Luke's gospel, we get some different information than we get from Mark and from Matthew's gospel and their description of Jesus' prophecy. Matthew's version is called the Olivet Discourse, which has much more information than Luke does. And this is why I said we're going to hold the olives tonight. Andy got that. The purpose of Jesus telling the disciples about the future is to prepare them and to encourage them. And we also get encouraged by this prophecy. Tonight's prophecy gives us a general outline of things to come. We get no details, no calendar dates. These are all future events. And this is why, as teachers of the Word of God, we really must be careful when teaching these prophecies. So we don't try to get any more specific than what the Scripture does. It's very dangerous territory. See, prophecy can be fully fulfilled, partially fulfilled, and prophecy can be even fully fulfilled and then be fulfilled again a second time in the future. So again, we must be careful when teaching these prophecies not to get more specific than what the Scripture does. Amen? Amen. Amen. The question often arises, why do we need to study these prophecies that require faith if we may never see them come to pass in our lifetime? Well, I kind of remember as a kid when I was told to do something, and if I would ask why, they'd say, well, because I told you so. I hated that. I really did. I hated that. I wanted to know the plan. I wanted to know the reason for having to do something that made no sense to me. Until I understood the plan, I just resisted. Probably didn't ever know that about me. I was like,
no, that's a hidden quality there.
I see a lot of shocked faces out there. But I believe the reason that Jesus is teaching us these future things to come is so that we can know without a doubt and we can be fully assured that God's plan is the one being fulfilled. And Jesus is really all done with the people who have rejected him. Now he's talking just to the disciples. And he's giving them hope. He's giving them understanding. And he's preparing them for the future. Luke 21:5 says, some of his disciples began talking about the majestic stonework of the temple and the memorial decorations on the wall. See, this rebuilt temple of Herod was very impressive. And when the disciples praised the grandeur to Jesus, the temple was in the midst of its 83rd year of the building program. That's a building program. But the temple made a deep impression on all who visited it. Josephus, the historian, gives a great detailed description of its beauty. Some of these stones, the size of them, were 12 to 60 feet long, 5.5 feet high, and 9 feet across. We actually saw some of those when we were in Israel. But the temple was the focal point of Jerusalem. Everyone who came to Jerusalem was amazed at this temple. And it's no wonder that the disciples felt such national pride as they surveyed this awesome temple. The temple was so magnificent. It was so God-honoring. It gave the presence of God a secure home in the Holy of Holies for many years to come. They would imagine that who could move these stones But Luke 21:6 says, but Jesus said, the time is coming when all of these things will be completely demolished. Not one stone will be left on top of another. And we talked about this earlier in Luke 19. But the response of Jesus to what these guys were admiring must have been like a heart. I mean, a knife in the heart of these disciples. To think that their beautiful, magnificent, 80-year building project that is constructed for God and all His glory is going to be destroyed, and that God is the one that's going to allow this to happen? Jesus is predicting in prophetic terms the arrival of judgment. These disciples realized that. Just like the one that Israel had experienced earlier. And when the Babylonians captured Israel and removed them from the land for 70 years, it was because Israel failed to give the land its Sabbath rest, and God judged them. And God is pronouncing that He is going to judge them again, that's the nation Israel, as a whole, because they failed to recognize Jesus as their Messiah. They failed to recognize God. And God is not going to let Israel have this temple to honor the God that they failed to recognize. God is not going to let the temple of God become Israel's idol. He's not going to. There's something strange in the original Greek language here in the prophecy. The Greek word used here for all these things is the word tota. That's us there, Pat. The Greek word becomes essential to this discourse because in the Greek language there are two Greek words spelled exactly the same. And here's the two Greek words. It's the New Testament word 50:23, tota. It's nominative, and accusative case. It's plural. These things. Now the New Testament word 50:24 is also tota as an adverb used meaning in the same way. Now the word is spelled exactly the same. The only difference is where the apostrophe is. It's in a different spot. But both are plural. One meaning more than one. The other means it's going to happen again, or in a similar order, the same way. We say the word again. Please hear me. I'm not saying this is a fact, because it's an end-time prophecy. But the questions the disciples ask leads me this way. And here's the questions in Luke 21:7. Teacher, they said, when will this happen? Here's the second question. What sign will show us that these things are about to take place? That's two different questions. See, the destruction of the temple is in the future to the disciples. But yet they asked two different questions. Now, did they understand it to be two different events? I don't know. Did they understand that the temple they're standing in is going to fall, and then later, or again, another future temple will fall? I don't know. It just struck me odd that that's the way it was put out. The point is, no one knows other than God. So pay attention to what Jesus is teaching us and don't get caught sleeping, because this is not going to be easy to read and hear because of the understanding I'm going to give you. Luke 21:8. He replied, Don't let anyone mislead you, for many will come in my name, claiming I am the Messiah, and saying the time has come, but don't believe them. And when you hear of wars and insurrections, don't panic. Yes, these things must take place, but the end won't follow immediately. Now, I love this warning about the nut jobs that are out there trying to proclaim prophecy, that they know it. How is it that they know something that God just told us that they won't know? I don't get that. God just said they won't know. They're going to make false claims and think they understand things. What Jesus is saying is, you will know that my prophecy is going to be true by the destruction of the temple, but the end won't come immediately, so don't be fooled by imposters. Don't worry, guys. You're not going to miss it. Jesus is not trying to be mysterious here, for only the Father truly knows when. Luke 21:10. Then he added, nation will go to war against nation, kingdom against kingdom. There will be great earthquakes, and there will be famines and plagues in many lands, and there will be terrifying things and great miraculous signs in heaven. Have all these things happened? Yes. Jesus told us this stuff will happen. So we won't lose faith in Jesus, or somehow figure that God has abandoned us because times are hard. He's warning us that times are going to be hard so that we can keep the faith. Jesus is also telling us these things are going to happen because, believe it or not, it's all in God's plan. Luke 21:12. But before all this occurs, there will be a time of great persecution. We will be dragged into synagogues and prisons, and you will stand trial before kings and governors because you are my followers. Has this happened? Yes. All but one of the 12 disciples were martyred. Many were crucified. And Jesus asked us to do something. He has already done. The church would seem like a failure if Jesus had not pre-warned the disciples that they were going to be killed for their faith. Can you imagine thinking that everything's going to be better because you're a Christian and then you have to die for your faith? Wow, what a concept. What is crazy is Jesus is going to use their death and their position of dying to further the gospel. It's the good news about salvation. Do you want to be a Christian? See, despite the chaos going on in the world today, and despite Christians having their heads cut off in the Middle East because they're Christians today, it's part of God's plan. We need to relax. Luke 21:13. But this will be your opportunity to tell them about me. So don't worry in advance about how to answer the charges against you, for I will give you the right words and such wisdom that none of your opponents will be able to refute you. That's a good promise. See, Luke uses the word witness. That's what he's talking about. To characterize the disciples. See, you will have the opportunity to tell them about me. That's witness. He uses the word witness to characterize the disciples. He uses the word witness to characterize the church today. See, we are to be his witness too. From the cross to the end of that time, Christians will be called to be witnesses for him. And part of their witness is how they face persecution. See, the book of Martyrs is full of martyrs. From Stephen's martyrdom to the suffering that still goes on today. See, the church defeats Satan this way, according to Revelation. In Revelation 12:11 it says, "And they have defeated him," meaning Satan, "by the blood of the Lamb and by their testimony. And they did not love their lives so much that they were afraid to die." Man. How'd you like that on your headstone? How'd you like that on your crown?
It's pretty well.
We're not to defend ourselves, only testify about Jesus and his salvation without fear. Luke 21:16. "Even those closest to you, your parents, brothers, relatives, and friends will betray you. Some will even kill you. And everyone will hate you because you are my followers. But," anytime the word "but" is in your Bible, underline it. "But not a hair on your head will perish. By standing firm, you will win your soul." I can't even imagine someone wanting to kill their child because they are a follower of Jesus. Because they became a Christian. Does anyone want to be a Christian? This is a salvation message. It's going to be great fun. Your life's going to get so much better. Everything's just going to happen for you automatically when you become a Christian. Because God loves you so much. But not a hair on your head will perish because of the promise of everlasting life. The promise says, although you may die, you will not perish. Luke 21:20. "And when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then you will know that the time of its destruction has arrived. Then those in Judea must flee to the hills, and those in Jerusalem must get out, and those in the country should not return to the city." Now in verses 20 and 21, Jesus describes Jerusalem's destruction in 70 AD in detail here. The sign of its destruction will be an army surrounds it. You would think that once the army surrounds it, it's too late to escape. But Jesus is promising an opportunity to flee, which is exactly what happened in 70 AD when the Roman army had Jerusalem surrounded and the Roman general decided to withdraw his army for a short season. And so, the believing Christians had an opportunity to escape, which they did, and they went to a place called Pella, where they were preserved. See, any attempt to go back into that city would have been a fatal attempt because the general was on his way back. See, it would take some serious faith and a knowledge of Jesus' prophecy to stay away from the city. Because once the Roman general and his army was gone, we'd be like, man, let's go back home. But Jesus said no. The city was about to be punished for its rejection of the Son of God. Luke 21:22. For those will be the days of God's vengeance. Man, that's hard to hear, ain't it? Especially in the New Testament. And the prophetic words of the scriptures will be fulfilled. How terrible it will be for pregnant women or for nursing mothers in those days. For there will be disaster in the land and great anger against this people. Wow. That's the opposite of so much of what the world, or so much of Christianity says about God. Well, it can't be like that. It can't be. It is. And they will be killed by the sword or sent away as captives to all the nations of the world. And Jerusalem will be trampled down by the Gentiles until the period of the Gentiles comes to an end. All of this happened in 70 AD. And the Jews were sent away to other nations. The remarkable part of this prophecy is that Jerusalem will be trampled down by the Gentiles, that's the Romans, until the period of the Gentiles comes to an end. That's a strange thing to say. But this is a great opportunity to explain some language that the Bible likes to use. Here are three terms concerning the Gentiles. The riches of the Gentiles, the fullness of the Gentiles, and the times of the Gentiles. See, the riches of the Gentiles is used in Romans 11:12. It refers to the place of privilege which the Gentiles or the church enjoy salvation by having peace with God. And the term fullness of the Gentiles is used in Romans 11:25, and it refers to the rapture of the church, when Christ's Gentile bride will be completed and taken from the earth. And the last term, times of the Gentiles, used here in Luke 21:24, really started when the Babylonians took Jerusalem in 521 BC. See, the reason God allowed the Babylonians to conquer Israel is because they failed to give the land its Sabbath rest for 490 years. Israel owed the land 70 years of rest. And so God used the Babylonians to take them out of the land for 70 years so the land could get its Sabbath rest that the land had coming to it. And after the 70 years, God offered the nation Israel grace by allowing them back into the promised land, the land that God owns. And Leviticus chapter 26 tells the nation Israel through Moses that if they obeyed God, they would be blessed in the land that was promised to them. But if he disobeyed God, that he would punish them. He would remove them from the land if they didn't get it right. And if they still didn't get it right, the punishment would be 7 times the previous punishment. Now, Israel's punishment ended May 14, 1948, when Israel became a nation again. Which happened in one day, just as the prophet Isaiah predicted some 700 years before Christ walked the earth. On our Thursday night Matthew's Bible study, I showed how the math works and how the punishment would end on the exact day of May 14, 1948. There was an emperor named Julian. He lived from 331 to 363 AD. This is after the destruction of the temple. They called him the apostate. And he tried to discredit Christianity by encouraging the Jews to rebuild the temple in Jerusalem. And according to the Roman historian Edwards Gibbons, the Jews went to work eagerly. And they were using silver shovels and cloth of purple to haul the dirt. But they were interrupted by earthquakes and balls of fire coming from the ground. This is what this historian reported. So they abandoned the project and they ran away shouting, "Goodness gracious, great balls of fire." I would have. But seriously, Luke focuses on prophecy of the near future events of Jerusalem's fall in 70 AD so far. And next he's going to talk about the end time prophecies, and as if they are connected somehow. Luke's account of this prophecy does not include the things mentioned like the tribulation. It does not mention how the Lord's decisions to cut these days short so humanity will survive. He lacks any comments about events not coming in the winter time. And most important, he does not discuss the abomination that causes the desolation. He mentions only Jerusalem's desolation. It would seem as if Jesus skips over this to tell us that the fall of Jerusalem will be the sign of the end times. But it doesn't tell us which time of the fall of Jerusalem. Does Jerusalem and the temple get destroyed again in the future? I don't know. See, Jesus is telling us the destruction of Jerusalem will be a dreadful time, especially for the most vulnerable people, especially pregnant mothers. Distress and wrath will overwhelm the people in the land, and yet people pray, "Jesus, let your kingdom come." It comes with death and suffering. Death and imprisonment will be the fate of so many citizens. Jerusalem will be trampled until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. And be assured that Jesus warns the nation Israel that it will be judged, and the temple will be abandoned, and it will be destroyed. Israel's fall in 70 AD is not the end of God's plan. And God is going to keep his end of the bargain with Israel. See, God promised to restore Israel. And it happened May 14th, 1948, when God restored Israel in one day, just as Isaiah had predicted. The day after Israel became a nation, it was at war with 3 different nations. They had 1 tank, a couple armored personnel carriers, and 3 artillery guns that were on order. And they held off Egypt, Jordan, and Syria. When their punishment was over, God said, "You belong back in the land." And he made it happen. Luke 21:25. "And there will be strange signs in the sun, moon, and stars, and here on earth the nations will be in turmoil, perplexed by the roaring oceans and strange tides. People